This is the third conversation celebrating New Hope Ministries' 40th anniversary as we walk through the decades and tell some of the stories from the early days and some of the more recent days here at New Hope Ministries. I'm Eric Saunders, and I'm the Executive Director in 2023, and I'm joined by Marian Musser, founding board member, and Linda DeCroes, founding caseworker, folks who are integral to the life of this ministry. And we're now starting to come into the time where I have memories of the work of this ministry, and I'm going to be turning over the coordination role in this segment over to my friends here. But what I remember when I came to New Hope in 2006 is the board sitting me down after they hired me and saying, "This is a model organization. We don't want you to change a thing. Just run it the way it's been given to you, and we'll be happy."
Now, I don't remember that conversation, but I do have a question for you, Eric. You were working in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
What brought you from Indiana to New Hope Ministries, South Central Pennsylvania?
My goodness, that was a long time ago, but I had gotten married a few years previously, and I had a wife and I had a young daughter, and my wife's family was here in central Pennsylvania, and my family was on the West Coast, and we knew how important it was to have family close by. And I said, I'm at a point in my career where I'm ready to step into a position of senior leadership. And so I started looking for Christian social work jobs here in central Pennsylvania, and not knowing what I was going to find, but God led me on an amazing journey here.
Now, if I remember, you had been called into ministry. So how did that transition take place from pastoral ministry, I think, or just was
it was something different, and I don't know what to call it, but I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, and kind of on the tail of the Jesus movement. And you may remember some of the Christian musical artists like Keith Green and then Rich Mullins, who really called people to holiness, and they called people to a social justice and living out your faith through action. And that kind of described my personal faith. And that led me, into nonprofit work in Christian ministry and some overseas service, and I ended up with a master's degree in social work. So I thought I was going to be an overseas missionary, that I was, and I really had a heart for mission and being able to share God's love with hurting people. And where I found my gifting and where I was most fulfilled was serving the poor. I was already moving in the direction of New Hope in my previous work with troubled teens and families, and doing amazing volunteer service experiences and domestic missions and some overseas missions. So I was already, on the path of doing this work when I found an organization that was experienced and could teach me about doing social ministry.
Well, now, at that time that you came to New Hope, New Hope was on the cusp of some changes, needing to make some changes, just because of the growth, the potential growth that we saw, and knowing that there were communities around us that would like to have New Hope centers in their communities. So what were your goals? What were some of your goals as you took on the position of Executive Director of New Hope?
Well, I think I have to give credit to my predecessors. People like Jolene and Chris Buer and Nancy Moran, who preceded me, because they took this amazing vision and put it on a solid footing. And each director gave something to this ministry for its stability, so that when I took over, we had a phenomenal board. We had financial security. We had stability and mature programs that were effective in doing good work. And, I was joking a while ago that the board told me, don't change a thing, when you started. But something happened. And when, in 2008, the board leadership came to me and said, Eric, we trust your skills, and we think that there could be an opportunity to grow this ministry and to make some important changes. We're gonna challenge you to come up with a vision for this ministry for the next couple of years. And that led to some strategic planning and some reorganization and program launches. But I couldn't have changed it without the entire staff and the entire board and the volunteers and the communities kind of getting behind it. But when to answer your question, what was my vision? I really believed that there were a couple things that were essential for New Hope in the mid 2000s. And the first was we were resource deprived. We just didn't have the support base to be able to realize the vision. And I said, we've got to invest in a professional and effective development program. Again, not to take anything away from the staff and the development team who had done so much leading up to that point, but we weren't investing enough to be able to bring in the support that was needed. And so that was vision number one. Vision number two, and I held on to, our mission is to share the love of Christ. We have to be essentially Christian. Not that you have to be Christian to get help here, but we are going to live out our faith. And I think number three, I don't believe that we fully value the role of our volunteers in the life of the organization. And I threw something out there which eventually was adopted and really, I think, was one of the most transformative things. And that was to say, we are not a staff-focused, volunteer-supported organization. We need to be a volunteer-centered, staff-supported organization. And that may sound like gobbledygook, but we were seeing rapid growth up to the 2008 recession, which we saw a doubling over a period of about 18 months of people who were coming for economic assistance and help. And there literally were not enough resources for us to be able to help people. And so adding more staff to take care of people wasn't an option. And I just said, what if the volunteers did the work? And we used our amazingly competent staff to train them and to support them and to equip them to be able to do these amazing jobs, and to say there really isn't any job that a competent, well-trained volunteer couldn't do here at New Hope. And so we blew up our volunteer program in terms of numbers, and I don't know that we would have made it through that recession period without that extra help.
Can you specifically mention some of the jobs that volunteers were trained for?
Well, the volunteers answered phones and they put food on shelves, and they packed food, and suddenly volunteers were teaching financial literacy classes, and they were driving trucks. We didn't have a truck at that point. They were going to the food bank and picking food. Ray, what an amazing scrounger, he still is, being able to find, resources to support this ministry. Doing casework. And then, kind of that last vision piece was, we do a phenomenal job solving crisis situations, but we're not doing a particularly good job preventing future crises. And how could we be an organization that does both? It wasn't that we have to stop giving people food and paying people's bills and encouraging people in tough times, but how are we equipping them? And that led to education, it led to job training, it led to more intensive casework support. Those, teaching financial literacy and, expanding our youth programs to, achieve greater outcomes. There were so many things that could be done, but there weren't enough resources, and so we had to get more for every dollar, that passed through our hands. Right. And we were able to do that really effectively. I think it wasn't a vision, but we were hit up just like in the 1980s. We started getting requests for could New Hope open an office in our community? And so that became the next thing that we had to deal with, especially in light of that 2008 recession that kind of lasted up to 2012 or so.
And that's a big thing that happened, the Hanover Center.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the year that the Hanover Center was open.
Well, that conversation started around 2010, 2011. I think 2012 is it's in that third decade.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was the Red Cross ran a food pantry that had been serving the Hanover community since the 1930s. And they were being forced because of economic constraints during the recession to tighten their mission focus. And if it wasn't one of their core areas of armed service or blood supply or one of those other, things that the Red Cross is so good at doing, they were asked to discontinue the programs. And to their credit, they said, this is too important to the community to let it go. And they asked some questions, and they said, who is competent in York County at running programs in rural communities? And the answer they got over and over, especially from the United Way, was you need to be talking to New Hope Ministries.
So that was the fourth major
That was number 4.
center for New Hope.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. And that was pretty far away from, it was disconnected, from our Dillsburg Center by about 25 miles.
But it opened the gate.
It did, and we
opened the
said,
gate
how could we fill in the difference? And,
yeah,
and it was East Berlin and Abbottstown, and and more to come as as we hit the 20 teens, and as those calls continue to come.
You mentioned about volunteers filling the food orders. That doesn't happen anymore.
It doesn't.
What?
On rare occasions, sometimes we'll do a home delivery, but we have always been good students of what works. And some of the ideas have been our ideas, and they've been really good ones. But a lot of them have been, what are other ministries and other nonprofits? Absolutely. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And there was a professionalizing that was taking place in the 20 teens, late 2000s, of honoring people's dignity by giving them a choice of the food that they get. And something that I figured out, because I kind of like the idea of studying efficiency, that if you just put the food out and let people take it, you don't have to pack as many. So,
that's right.
I
well,
counted.
You don't have to waste either.
No, exactly right.
Of them being handed food that they're not going to use.
He gets, politely left in the parking lot. We were able to get the number of times that we touched a single item of food from about 10, because I counted. I made a tick every time, down to about 4 touches before it went out the door with one of our guests. And if you think about the hundreds of thousands of food items, just reducing the number of times you have to move that can of corn, by over half was an amazing time savings. But then to be more efficient, as you said, and to provide dignity, and to be able to treat the food pantry like a grocery store. I think there was a little hesitance that, oh my gosh, they're going to rob us blind. And we said, let's see what happens. And you know what? People were so respectful.
Well,
of that change, and so appreciated being given the freedom that it never became an issue.
But they're given cards that tell them how many food items they can get from a particular category.
Yeah, that's Spanish on one side, and English on another.
And they honor those.
So well. In fact, we have to encourage people to take more. Are you sure that's going to be enough? Because people don't want to be a burden. And we say, no, absolutely. We'd rather you take it and use it or give it to a neighbor than we have to throw, food away that's spoiled.
That's right. Much rather give it away than throw it away.
So that was one of the changes, that we went through during that time period. But it was small changes and asking people to try something new, and most of the things were really well received and really made a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about guest versus client.
Oh boy. So we have been a wonderful organization since our founding, but sometimes we had a bit of an us and them mentality. And I heard a Christian minister, a guy named Larry James, who ran a ministry called City Square in Dallas, Texas, speak in the late 2000s. And I was blown away. And he said, we're not better than the people who need our services. We are just like them, and they have dignity, they have value, they have something to offer. And he challenged those of us who were, hearing the presentation to break down the difference between those who give and those who receive. And I said, well, how do we do that at New Hope? And so I made a radical change. And I said, we're going to allow people who receive services to come and be volunteers and we're going to allow people who volunteer who might go through a financially tough time to anonymously receive help, if they need it. And and so we're going to say that what matters is who we are in Christ. And we said this idea of client sends the wrong message. And so one of my colleagues, Sue Fornicola, who has just such a compassionate heart, it was her idea. And she said, I think we should call them our guest, because when somebody comes into your home, you give them the best that you have. You make them feel welcome, and you show them every courtesy. And that's what we want to do when people come to New Hope.
Yes, and I think we do that well.
We do.
Yeah,
we're not perfect, but we follow somebody who is.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And
I think they appreciate it.
It expresses respect.
Yes.
For them in a different kind of way.
Yeah. So we've reached the end of the time for this conversation, and I'm so glad to be able to spend it with you. I'm grateful for those who have watched and who have listened to the conversation and got to hear what a neat journey that this ministry, this organization called New Hope, has been on. And we would invite you to tune in next time to hear about what happened in the teens, and in the final episode, we're going to be talking about what's coming for the future. But we got so many more good stories to tell. We can't say thank you enough. And we're so grateful for God and His blessing and His leadership in this organization over the last 40 years.
And thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a joy.